Hello and welcome to episode 222 of Ferg on the Freak. I'm that bloke from Rugby League Project, Andrew Ferguson. You can find me on Twitter at AndrewRP. Joining me as always is the magnificent League Freak. You can find on Twitter at League Freak. How you going there, mate?
I'm going very wood, apparently. How are you, Andrew?
We know what you've been up to before we started the podcast.
I was just thinking, what we should have done is an intro for Richie Beno.
That's why I paused.
Oh, really?
I was thinking I should do a chew for 22.
Great minds.
Magnificent. Look, we had a good bit of feedback from the last episode when we looked at the greatest teams of all time, and some of that feedback said, "How's about doing some of the worst teams of all time?" So
and you've worked out a metric for this. Why don't you tell us about how the metric works and how many teams we'll be going through? Because there were, like you just mentioned to me, there's a lot of teams that didn't do really well.
Yeah, so I started out and I got every team that had a regular season win percentage of 20% or worse, and that gave me 103 teams. 104 teams. And then from there, I've decided to rank them all based on their win percentage, then their average points conceded, and the average margin. And the higher or the worse you were in each one, you got a rank of 1, and so on and so forth. And the team that had the lowest combined score of all those, ta-da, is your worst team all up.
Yeah, because it really takes into account what you consider to be a worse performance. Is it can't win games, or is it you concede so many points? Because some of the seasons were so short early on in the game's history that basically you could have a team early on that would only win one game all year, but they would be considered to be better than a team in recent years that maybe got 4 wins, but because we're playing so many games, or even 2 wins, because we're playing so many games now, it makes it difficult to just rate them purely on wins and losses.
Exactly. So a good example, Cumberland from 1908, they had 1 win from just 8 games. One of the historically worst teams out there, but 1 win from 8 games equals a win percentage of 12.5%. And you look at someone like, the West team from 1999, they had the same win percentage, but they only won 3 games out of 24.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how that all works. So the win percentage is important. The average points conceded is important because that shows you how bad the team's defense was. And the average margin also takes into account their bad defense, plus if they had a really poor attack.
Yeah.
Because, if they've got a really poor attack, but the defense wasn't atrocious, the average margin will pick up that gap as well. So there we go. We've got a top 20 here this time.
Excellent. So we'll go from 20 to 1, I guess, hey?
Yeah, we will.
Excellent. So who's lucky number 20?
Lucky number 20 is the 1918 Annandale side.
Oh, nice.
They went through they were the first team to go through an entire season without winning a match. They lost all 14 games. Scored 73 points, conceded 316, had an average margin of minus 17.36.
Wow.
And trust me, that's not even close to the worst average margin.
Oh, jeez. Okay, here's number 19.
Now, numbers 19 and 18 were actually back-to-back seasons for Newtown. So the 1977 Newtown team had 2 wins from 22 games, and the 1978 Newtown team had also 2 wins from 22 games, which was a win percentage of 9.09%. The 1978 Newtown side only scored 199 points, which is an average score of 9 per game. But the 1977 Newtown team conceded 604, which was 27.45 points per game, which was worse than the 78 outfit. So,
jeez,
they were pretty bad. To think that they actually made it to a grand final, was it 2 or 3 years after that? That's an impressive turnaround.
And then we're gone, almost immediately.
Yes. And those teams struggled. That Newtown side struggled there in the mid to late 70s, mostly because there was an awful lot of, let's call it off-field issues that went on with a lot of the players at the time.
Sounds like a whole episode there we could do.
Oh, it would be.
All right, who's next?
Next, we've got the 1993 Gold Coast side. They had one win from the 22 games that year.
Ooh, I actually think I might have gone and seen this team play. Was that the one that was? Were they coached by Wally Lewis?
I think they might have been, actually. Yeah,
it was either 92 or 93. I feel like he coached them.
It was,
but
definitely,
I feel like it was 93.
Yeah, he was coached there in 93.
Yeah, I went and watched that team play Penrith.
The top try scorer for the year was Adrian Vowles, and he scored 5 tries.
Oh, wow.
The top point scorer was Steve Weston, and he scored 30 points.
How's that even possible?
That's pretty bad.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. Did they have a bunch of point scorers, or was it just they weren't converting many tries?
They scored on an average of 10.4 points per game.
Wow.
They were just a hopeless attack.
Wow, that's incredible.
And speaking of hopeless attack, we go on to our next team, which is the 1984 Western Suburbs team.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one win from 24 games, which was they played 2 extra games than that Gold Coast team in 93. And they averaged 10.17 points per game in attack, which is a little bit less than that that Gold Coast Seagulls team.
Mm-hmm.
They were dire.
Now, that was around about the period where it looked like they were going to be kicked out the comp, and they kind of just made it through, didn't they?
This is the year after. So they were pretty much on the chopping block and had practically been kicked out of the comp at the end of 1983.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of things that helped them get back in. So the New South Wales Rugby League had actually approached Newtown about relocating out to Campbelltown.
Mm-hmm.
And the game was actually going to give them 1 year to relocate everything out to Campbelltown, get all their finances in order, and they'd be able to continue out there. And before they got to do that, Western Suburbs decided to move from Arana out to Campbelltown. And that's partly what killed off Newtown and what partly kept West alive. West were doing things too, like having concerts and raffles and stuff like that to raise enough money to pay their bills to make sure they could continue on, and they did just enough to continue on for the next year.
Pretty savvy move, really, huh?
Oh, yeah, it made a lot of sense too.
Mm.
So, yeah, it was pretty remarkable. We might do an episode on all of that too, because there's quite a lot going on. The South team from 83 were also on the chopping block, as were Cronulla at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention Newtown. And Newtown actually did get cut. So, yeah, quite a lot went on there.
Mm.
Now, the next team was the 1996 Eastern Suburbs team.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
They lost all 18 games that year.
I had forgotten all about them.
They weren't exactly a team that got disgraced.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they didn't have a lot of huge scores put on them.
They just couldn't win games.
So they pretty much conceded 20 points in nearly every single game.
Was that the year they had Shane Werrett as a winger?
No, we're going back to 66, mate.
Oh, 66. I heard 96, sorry.
That's all right. This is 66. So they only had at that time one representative who'd actually played interstate footy, and that was Kevin Junee.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a pretty handy player to be in a team that couldn't win a game.
Yeah, I think they largely had a fairly young sort of team.
Yeah.
Just having a look through the team lineup there. I mean, I don't know too many of the names there. A young John Peard was in the side.
Bomber.
Yeah. Who I believe is a distant relative of mine as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I went and saw him at St Mary's Leagues Club at a luncheon with him, Mal Meninga and Gary Freeman. It was fantastic.
He's a feral personality, that's for sure.
Mm.
But yeah, that east side, they only had one blowout score, and it was a round 14 loss to Manly where they lost 53-0.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, they conceded 30 points in a game twice, and the rest was less than that. So three times. So, they weren't being disgraced every week. They just didn't have a very good attack.
Okay. So who's next on the list?
Next is the 1990 South Sydney team.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I'd probably rank this high based on the year before. So in 1989, Souths were the minor premiers.
Mm-hmm.
And then during the off-season, a drug scandal ripped through the club. And it was mostly marijuana.
Yeah.
A lot of players had tested positive to marijuana, I believe. South had to lay off a fair few players. Just devastated the club. And they won just 2 of 22 games the following year.
Yeah.
And never recovered.
Yeah. They were terrible for the rest of the decade until they got kicked out.
Yeah. That was pretty much it. It decimated the club because they'd been reasonably strong through the 80s as well.
Mm-hmm.
They even featured in the 87 final series.
Mm-hmm.
So they were a pretty decent team, but yeah, that 1990 season, that was one from hell for them.
It makes you think about if right now it come out that any team in the competition had a lot of positive tests for marijuana, which is a banned substance,
mm-hmm.
How it would be handled by the NRL. I think there'd be players that would be suspended for a number of weeks and fines. I don't think it would be devastating like that was, though.
No, because I think this is the first time we had a whole club being pretty much heavily impacted by a drug scandal.
Yeah.
And it's only because testing was still in its infancy back then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it did rock the club pretty hard. They conceded 652 points that year, which is way worse than anybody else.
Yeah.
And it took the mantle off Gold Coast as being the worst team because Gold Coast were widely tipped to be the Wooden Spooners in 1990 after having a pretty poor 88 and 89 season.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. The next team is the 1946 South Sydney team, and they lost all 14 games that year. And this is the year before Manly and Parramatta came into the comp.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
And I believe that was the first wooden spoon that South Sydney collected.
Mm-hmm.
So it took them 38 years to come last.
Jeez.
Yeah, they scored just under 9 points per game and conceded just over 25. That was a pretty bad year for them. And they did struggle for a while after that too.
Mm-hmm.
The next team is, you're going to hear this club a fair bit coming up. Mm-hmm. University from 1934.
And it's funny because they're one of the teams when we started talking about like best teams, worst teams, there's a couple of clubs where you go like that one, and that one for worst team of all time. And University's one of them, unfortunately.
Yeah, they've got 4 years in a row here where they were just trash. Let's be honest, they were utter trash.
Mm-hmm.
They had 1 win from 14 games here, scored just 8 points a game and conceded 26. So it was similar to that South team from 46.
Yeah.
Next is a more recent one. It was the North Queensland Cowboys in their debut season of 95.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
They had 2 wins from 22 games. So while the win percentage was a bit higher than the rest of the teams here at 9%, they conceded 30 points a game.
It's interesting because there was a lot happening in that season off the field. And I think it probably takes away from how bad they were. Because if they had come in and everything was fine, people would have immediately have been saying, is this a good idea? Was this a mistake letting a North Queensland team in? But, of course, the rugby league world was tearing itself apart at the time, so not too many people really caring what was going on at the field. It was kind of what was going on in the courts.
That's right. The next one, we're starting to get towards the really bad teams now.
Yeah, so what are we up to now?
This is number 10 now. So we're in the top 10.
We're in the top 10. Excellent.
So at 10th, we've got the 1910 Western Suburbs team.
Okay.
They had one win from 14 games. They conceded 27 points per game. They come up against a red-hot South Sydney team in the middle of the year and got beat 67-0. And to this day, that's still South Sydney's biggest win.
Far out, that's crazy.
The week after that, South beat North 53-4. And what was just an unbelievable, fortnight for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, West were just...
Where were West based at that time?
Oh, Ashfield, at a guess.
It wouldn't have been what we would really consider proper Wests.
No. They were known as the fruit pickers back then too.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I never heard that before.
There you go.
Is there a reason they were called the fruit pickers?
I dare say there was fruit to be picked out there.
Oh, thanks, Scoop.
Let's be honest. The nicknames are pretty obvious back then.
Yeah, true.
The next, number 9 is, and this might surprise you, is the 1999 Western Suburbs team.
We both hold them dear to our hearts, don't we?
Yeah, they're usually a marker for, if you want to find out about some of the worst defences that's ever been around, you go to that 99 West side. They hold the record for conceding the most amount of points in a season at 944, which was 39.33 points per game.
And geez, old bat. Like, the weird thing about them is at the time watching them, you knew they were historically bad.
Yeah. And
are they
that
the worst
came
team
after
you've ever seen?
Oh, geez. I'd probably have to say yes.
Yeah, I hold them as the worst team I've seen.
I've got to say though, this Broncos team this year is pushing it, and it's only because the quality of players they've got. They shouldn't be performing as badly as they are. That West team from '99 didn't really have many household names, let alone stars.
Yeah, when you looked at that West team, it was a little bit like the Bulldogs right now, or over the last couple of years, where you're like, what are they supposed to do? These guys are just outmatched in the top grade, and yeah, I get what you mean about the Broncos. You look at their team, and look, there's a bunch of those players that would walk into a lot of teams in the NRL right now, and they shouldn't be performing where they are. But all the numbers and their performances and everything, they're terrible. But yeah, that West team, that was terrible. Now, was it that year that Tommy Raudonikis said they didn't have a game plan? So how could the opposition teams know what they're going to do if they didn't know what they were going to do?
Correct. One of the greatest ever rugby league quotes, that one.
Yeah, it really was.
That West team, you might be surprised to know, had the second worst points conceded per game average.
Oh, only the second worst.
Second worst at 39.33.
Okay.
The worst is the very next team, and that was the 1935 Bulldogs.
Oh, yeah.
They conceded 41.25 points per game over a 16-game season. So that's 660 points they conceded in 16 games.
That's incredible.
And a lot of that comes down to a 91-6 to loss to St. George.
Mm-hmm.
The following week, they lost 87-7 to East, the two biggest wins in the game's history.
Mm-hmm.
East then put another 60 points on them later on in the season.
That's and the East, Dave Brown, he scored the most points in a single match by a player in that game, that 87-point game.
That's correct, yes. He scored 5 tries and 15 goals for 45 points in that game. And in the return match when they played later on, he scored 6 tries and 10 goals.
How much was that for?
That would be 38 points.
It'd be so weird to see that.
So he scored, 83 points in 2 games against Canterbury that year.
Yeah, that's incredible.
As they went on to score 152 points against the Bulldogs in 2 games.
That's incredible.
That's just insane.
Yeah, all those numbers. That's So far, the first numbers that have really blown my mind, the West's points conceded over the season is crazy. But that one there, it's like, I just can't do the calculations in my head and work out what that must have been like.
I'll go through, their season results and just read out the scores where they conceded at least 30 points a game. Okay. So round 2, they lost to South 37-9. Round 3, lost to Balmain 44-5. Round 5, lost to St George 91-6. Round 6, lost to East 87-7. Round 12, they lost to Balmain 39-7. Round 13, lost to Newtown 49-9. Round 14, lost to St George 34-6. Round 15, lost to East 65-10. And round 18, lost to West 65-11.
Oh, man. Can you imagine conceding 30-plus points? And you're like, wow, that's one of our better weeks.
Yeah.
Far out.
And they had 2 wins that year. And they were both against University.
For old University.
Poor old University. Speaking of, the 1936 University team comes next.
So the following year from that, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep.
They had 1 win from 14 games. They scored just 99 points that year and conceded 414.
Whoa.
Yeah, they were a struggling outfit at this stage. They won something like 5 games over the last 5 years, 6 years, something like that.
Jeez.
They were just being whipping boys at the stage. They literally were the bye.
Yeah, that's terrible. Now I'm starting to feel bad for them.
Now we're into the final 6 here.
Okay.
And the next one is the 1920 University team. And they are the highest ranked team on this list that didn't win the wooden spoon.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yes, they had 1 win from 13 games, and that 1 win was against the last placed Annandale side, who we'll get to just slightly up on the list here.
Yeah.
But they conceded 38.31 points per game in those 13 games that year.
Wow.
So that was 498 points conceded.
You know, it's interesting, like, then 16 years later, they're terrible. Like,
yeah.
That's just their history is terrible.
That's exactly what it is. Just whipping boys constantly. So now we're into the top 5.
Okay.
And the first one is one that we've all seen. Oh, sorry, the 5th place one is the one we've all seen, and that was the 2016 Knights team.
Yeah, and this one, this was another team you watched them, and I still rate West's worse than them. Would you rate West's worse than that team?
Yes.
Okay. But you knew while you were watching this Knights team that this was a low point and there was nothing salvageable from that year.
No, that's right. Conceded the 4th highest amount of points in a year, about 800 even. The 1998 West team had 802 points conceded. The 1982 Canberra team conceded 862, and that 99 West side we mentioned before conceded 944. Yeah. They won just 1 of 24 games, had a draw as well, so they won 4.17% of games that year.
Wow.
Conceded 33 points per game.
That's pretty special. Who was their 1 win against? Please don't say Penrith.
I thought you were just trolling me then.
No. Is it West?
I reckon it might have been West. Yeah, it was against the West Tigers, 18-16.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I didn't know that.
I was confident I knew that one. West Tigers, eh?
That probably got them into 9th place.
How consistent is that, eh? Because this year they also came up against a team that hadn't won in almost 365 days, and they lost to them as well.
Oh, jeez.
Utter trash. Anyway, top 4.
Okay.
So, number 4 is the 1920 Annandale team, which I just mentioned. They lost all 13 games that year, scored just 4.5 points per game, and conceded 29.38.
Whoa. So they scored less than a converted try at the time, because tries are only 3 points.
That's correct.
Far out.
Atrocious attack.
That's rough.
Yeah. One of the worst attacks. That's actually worse than the 1908 Cumberland team, which scored 38 points in 8 games.
Jeez. That's really bad.
And the final 3 places are all taken up by University.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm actually impressed by that.
In each of these upcoming 3 seasons, they did not win or draw a single game.
Okay.
So 1935 University come dead last, lost all 16 games, scored 109 points, conceded 529, which, while conceding 33 points is atrocious, it was dwarfed by the Bulldogs that year, who's conceded 8 points per game more on average.
Yeah.
But they lost 2 games to that Bulldogs team that got flogged by everyone. That's how bad University was.
Yeah, that's kind of weird that their defence overall wasn't as bad, but they still lost to a team whose defence was worse. That's so weird.
Yeah. Number 2 is the 1921 University team. They lost all 8 games that year, conceded 292 points, which was 36.5 points per game. And at the top is the 1937 University team, their last season in the game. 0 wins, 0 draws, 8 losses, averaged 5.13 points per game, and conceded 38.63 points per game.
Jeez. That's amazing.
That's how nasty they were.
There should be like some sort of celebration for futility for the University team.
Oh, absolutely.
We should call the wooden spoon the University spoon or something like that.
I think that's a great idea. We need to somehow recognise this team.
We really do, because that's pretty special to have the 3 worst teams of all time, but then also be scattered through through the top 20 still.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh no, they were horrible.
Sorry, go on.
No, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, have you got their overall winning percentage for their entire history? Because it must be terrible.
Yes, I do. Where did I have that? I remember looking this up for you the other day.
Yeah, we were talking about this, weren't we?
Here we go. Is that it? Yeah, they had 47 wins, 5 draws, and 190 losses.
Oh.
So that works out at... Whoops. Trying to use the calculator here. 47 divided by 237, 242. That's 19.4%.
Wow. Through history. That's rough.
That's depressingly rough.
Yeah. Can you imagine being a University fan when they enter the competition and you're like, this is going to be my team? That'd be really bad.
Oh, you couldn't. You just couldn't.
No, you'd have to get off. You'd have to, for your own sanity, you'd just have to get off the train.
Now, one thing I wanted to mention is there's been 15 teams in the history of the game that have conceded 30 points in a season or worse.
Yeah.
And most of those have been mentioned here. But at the moment, the 2020 Broncos team are one of those teams. And they're averaging 31 points per game that they're conceding.
And when you watch them at the moment, I mean, their defense it's hard to explain how easy some of the tries are. And the thing that gets me is not so much the tries that teams are scoring out wide. It's when, you're attacking the Broncos line and it'll just be forward that does a hit up. Nothing special about it. A 1-out hit up. And they just tend to just go through the line and score. And it's that lack of desire in their defense, which is pushing to that level.
That initial contact when making tackles is so weak. It's almost like the defense are standing flat-footed. They're not trying to lean into a tackle. They're standing flat-footed. And so when a player runs at them and puts a fend on, it doesn't matter how small that player is. If they're running at someone who's standing flat-footed, they're going to push them over. And that's kind of what's happening an awful lot, and especially in the last 20 minutes of games. I mean, for a team to come through 15 games and to have scored less than 20 points for the year in the final 20 minutes of a match over those 15 games, that's atrocious.
It really is. And, like, I guess that because we're playing less rounds this year, we're only playing 20 rounds, that's going to help them historically. Because I think that towards the end of this year, I wouldn't be shocked if that average loss number goes up, because there's so much going on at the Broncos right now. Man, they really are bad. And you know, like, you can't see where they really deserve to be there. And, like, they've got a game this weekend against the Roosters. The Roosters could put up, they could put up 50 against them. It wouldn't be a shock.
Again, easy.
What's their run-in? So they've got let's have a look at their run-in. They've got the Roosters this weekend. Next weekend, on round 17, they play the Panthers. I mean, who knows what that's going to be. That might end up being the Panthers' biggest win ever. Kickout will be back for that game. Round 18, they're playing the Gold Coast Titans, which won't be easy for them.
Titans will put 30 on them again.
Yeah. Round 19, they're playing the Parramatta Eels.
Oh.
And in the last round, they're playing the Cowboys, so that'll be something.
That could very well be a challenge for the spoon, that one.
It really could be. Right now, the Broncos are in 15th, the Cowboys are in 14th. The Bulldogs look like they're threatening for a win, but...
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. If we're looking at those three teams right now, especially now that the Cowboys are without Jason Taumalolo for a few weeks, if not the rest of the year, because he got himself an injury today.
Yeah.
The Bulldogs probably look most likely to score the next win out of those three sides. And if they do that, their points difference is going to make them jump up above them, both those teams.
Yeah.
And if the Bulldogs can jag 2 wins and those Queensland teams don't pick up any, then we'll have 3 Queensland teams at the bottom of the ladder.
That'd be crazy, hey?
It will.
The thing is, like, the Bulldogs, I think you would agree with me, they still are the least talented team in the competition.
Yeah, look, their attack is pedestrian at best. It looked a bit better today. Having a proper fullback in the team in Hopewadi certainly makes them look a bit sharper. Mm-hmm. But it's still a pedestrian attack. It's still struggling. And they're they don't even play for 60 minutes in attack, and that's part of their problem. They just drop their guard so quickly.
And, like, you can't even pile onto them because they are what they are, unfortunately, at the moment. And it's because of the way the club's been run for quite some time. But the thing about the Broncos is you look at their team and, I mean, there's a bunch of players like Tony Staggs, I think, is a fantastic player. I think he's underrated. Even someone like Herbie Farnworth, he's been pretty good this year. Anthony Milford's on $1 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Onfangao, a pretty handy player. Isaac Luke is an older player now, but he's a handy player. Don't mind Reece Kennedy. David Fafita is one of the best second rows in the game. You can't really blame him. He's playing fantastic.
And he's missed part of the fair chunk of the season too.
Yeah. So, and then you've got someone like a Payne Haas. Pangai, Tavita Pangai obviously has been in the side for most of the year. It's incredible that their defence is that bad.
Is Pangai now gone though?
I believe he is still waiting for his breach notice from the club, which is kind of weird that he's still waiting for it. But he's not officially sacked.
Oh, there you go. Another young player they got there who's been playing pretty well is Thomas Flegler.
Yeah, he's all right.
And Patrick Carrigan.
And this is the thing, like, we can sit here and talk about the players that have been playing well, and then you watch the games and how terrible their defence is. I mean, they had the Dragons scored 28 points against them. The Dragons can't attack.
Yeah. That's the thing, though, is that the good players that the Broncos have got, none of them are in the spine.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's your problem. you've got to have a good spine. You've got to have a spine that can put points on, and they just don't.
And we've talked about in defence especially, you see it in attack, but in defence especially, they look as though they're a team that hasn't got a defensive philosophy. They look as though they're just all individuals out there doing not even doing their best, but trying to, some of them go up and in, some of them slide. They're all over the place.
Yeah. No, they're lost. That's the only way to put it. They are just lost.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think of that list of the worst teams ever? Were there any there that you thought should have been in there?
I was happy to see West's in there because they're, as I said, the worst team I've seen. It feels weird that the Knights are in there, but I can see how they tick all of the boxes. I'm a little bit surprised that University take the top 3 teams. I'm trying to think if there's a team. I thought that with 20 teams, Penrith might have snuck a team in there because for the start of their history, they were just an abomination for the most part.
They weren't too bad because they didn't get the spoon too often.
Mm-hmm.
Like they came in at a time when East were at their absolute worst, and they had Cronulla as well to compete with, who was struggling as well for a while there. And a few other teams.
Parramatta too. Parramatta were pretty bad.
Parramatta were picking up a lot of spoons at the time. The Bulldogs were struggling too.
Yeah.
So it just meant there was quite a group at the bottom of the ladder that were fighting over wins, and it just meant that their win percentage was able to stay up reasonably high, which kept them off that list.
Yeah, and I guess it also meant that they were getting wins against each other as well.
Yeah, and they weren't a team that often got flogged either.
Mm-hmm.
They just lost frequently, but they didn't get flogged frequently.
Yeah.
That's the most positive spin I can put on it.
Exactly, and that's how bad they were. It's they were absolutely terrible, but not that terrible.
They weren't shit terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that list, and I'm glad that we've done it back to back with the best teams of all time as well. So it's we can say look at 221, look at 222.
There you go. That's what the people wanted. That's what we've got them.
Exactly. Well, look, thank you for putting that list together for us. This is the best part about doing a podcast with Rugby League's leading statistician. And it's funny because these are things that you and me, on some level, we've talked about a lot of this stuff in podcasts we haven't recorded at about 3:30 a.m. when we're doing some deep dive into the stats that you've got there on your computer. So it's fantastic to finally put them into podcasts.
Absolutely. We're going to be doing an awful lot more of these because people seem keen on them. So I'm working on some stats for a few others at the moment, so they'll be coming up in the next week or so.
That's awesome. I can't wait for them.
One's almost ready to go.
Excellent.
So, thanks for tuning in, everyone. As always, make sure you, follow us on Twitter at FergoFreakPod. We're on Instagram at FergoFreakPod. You can check us out on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, on our own website, fergoonthefreak.com. You can contact us over there.
Yeah, hit contact. You'll send an email straight through the website, which is fantastic. The other way you can get in touch is if you email us at podcast@leaguefreak.com.
Brilliant. And I would just say there has been a review in the last few days, and I want to read it out because it's a short one.
Okay, go for it.
So it's titled, Not Journalists of Rugby League.
Excellent.
This is the only podcast I listen to without wearing clothes. I wish I could give it 6 stars. And it's from C. Barb's Ring.
Oh, jeez. Well, it's the best way to listen to our podcast, I reckon. Naked.
Yes, and what? Looking at Barb's Ring.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I could leave that part out.
Considering how we started this podcast, I assume that's what you're doing. And on that note, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll catch you all next time.